Okay, so imagination and psychosynthesis. This little video on the role, the importance, the emphasis that psychosynthesis has on imagination and imagery, not just in the method, in all the various creative visualizations and techniques, but also in the goal it has of a psychologically healthy life as a synthesis, as a creative synthesis. So we'll see how that's connected to imagination, because imagination, as we shall see, is inherently synthetic. Not in the sense of like rubber, I always think of rubber when I say synthetic, but in the sense of synthesis, which is about bringing together all the various elements and holding the tension between them as a greater whole. The first thing about imagination is to see where it is in the original presentation by Assagioli. So let's look at the star diagram, one of the key diagrams in psychosynthesis. So it's a star, and Assagioli, the founder of psychosynthesis, places around the points of the star the various psychological functions, of which one is imagination. So from this we learned that imagination has an equal importance to thinking, to feeling, to sensation, all of which are included in psychosynthesis theory and practice as equivalents. Now, in terms of what is imagination, psychosynthesis doesn't directly give you a definition. Assagioli doesn't say exactly what he means by imagination, and this is often the case in therapies that draw upon imagination. They rather assume what it is and talk about how to use it. However, we can look for some clues in Assagioli's psychosynthesis. The key quote of which is this: imagination is a function which in itself is to some extent synthetic, since imagination can operate at several levels concurrently, those of sensation, feeling, thinking, and intuition. So imagination is a function which in itself is to some extent synthetic. So remember, I was briefly describing synthesis as bringing together all the various elements into a greater whole. So imagination does that, which tells you that imagination isn't actually a discrete psychological function, I would argue. It's that which joins up all the other functions. It's what we see it between our thinking and feeling and sensation, which is why it's perhaps difficult to notice it and define it as a discrete thing, because it isn't a discrete thing. The second and related place within Assagioli's theory to look for an understanding of imagination are the psychological laws. Now, I won't quote from them, they're a little bit wordy, but the principle within Assagioli's psychological laws is that wherever you find, for example, a strong feeling, like anxiety, if you look into it closely enough, you will see connected to it a thinking or a belief system, like sort of paranoid, fear. Also, if you look into the anxiety closely enough, you'll notice the bodily sensations or the posture or the gestures that go with that anxiety. And also, if you look into the anxiety closely enough, you'll see images. You'll see the story that's connected to that feeling of anxiety. Similar thing applies if you start with a thought, you can trace that to the feeling, the sensation, the images. But again, we're seeing that imagination is woven into and surrounds the other psychological functions. So let's hold that in mind and look at two different definitions. The first of which is the dictionary definition of imagination, which I wouldn't recommend, but we need to deal with it because I think a lot of common sense assumptions that we have about imagination comes from there. The dictionary definition says that imagination is the images in the mind that we have that are disconnected from sense experience. So the dictionary tells you that imagination is an inner faculty, almost a fantasy, separate from the real, the objective. However, if imagination is woven into sense experience, feelings, thoughts, if you think about it, how you see sight is a sense sensation, hearing is a sense sensation. These senses connect us to the world. Similarly, we have feeling and thinking responses to the world, people, places and things. And this allows us to consider a broader definition of imagination as woven into perception. So not separate from the world, but actually that which joins us up to the world. So in my book, Waking Dreams, I talk about imagination as the perception of images that arise between us and the world. A story appears. And that's imaginative life. Now, you might be saying, hey Alan, but that's crazy because, the world's just the world. How is that? How are you imagining the world? Well, let's move into a broader understanding of the key concept in psychosynthesis of identification. So normally we consider identification as a limited range of feelings and thoughts and sensations, body, feelings, mind, as we say in psychosynthesis. However, we can think also of an identification as a limited fantasy story that we're telling about who we are and the world that we live in. A habitual, a repetitive story, perhaps based more in the past than on what's happening around us in the present. So for example, if you're caught up in such an imaginal identification, despite, for example, your therapist being really kind and patient and empathic, you might perceive your therapist as critical, as judgmental, as bored, because you've spent a lot of time around people who were critical and judgmental and bored with you, and you've kind of become locked into that story, and you go around imagining people are critical to you when they might not be. So you're imagining the world in a particular way, and we can work with that and to help people to imagine more fully, more accurately, to bring in new possibilities of who they are and how the world is towards them, that lets in the care and the empathy and the patience of, for example, in this case, the psychotherapist. And that would be an imaginal disidentification. The other place you can see imagination implicitly in psychosynthesis theory and practice is with regards to the will. So the will is like a massive other topic that we won't go into in this little video, but basically it's Assagioli bringing in the importance of not just understanding and consciousness, but what you do with that understanding and consciousness, how you act. It's not good enough just to have insights. It's like being able to do something with those insights that really matters, and that's the will. So my favourite Assagioli quote goes like this: when will and imagination come into conflict, imagination wins. When will and imagination come into conflict, imagination wins. So what he means by that is that imagination is an important precursor for any kind of change process. It's not enough to have good ideas or just to desire change. We need to be able to imagine those ideas and desires as realistic possibilities. Because without that, we just go with the flow of the familiar rather than step into the uncertainty of the new. We go with the flow of the old, habitual, limited fantasy imagining, rather than stepping into the new, expanded, fuller imagining. So in this sense, therapy, if you like, and indeed psychosynthesis psychotherapy, as far as I'm concerned, is a process or an act of imagination. We spend time, therapy if you like, this is a therapy room, people come into the consulting room to begin to let go of their old story about who they are and how the world is, which isn't easy, and that's a disidentification. But then it's like we need to create a space within which to begin to imagine as a realistic possibility a new understanding, a new story going forwards. So if you like, therapy is a time between stories within which psychosynthesis has a lot to offer. There's a plethora of techniques that psychosynthesis has which effectively create this space to begin to reimagine who we are and how we are in the world. So let's just round off with a few tips on how to cultivate your imaginative life, which is very simple. Spend time, take the time to spend the time with images. Sunsets, paintings, novels, movies. Just notice the surrounding sights and sounds of everyday life and allow them to impinge upon you. I mean, no one walks up to a sunset or walks around a corner and sees a sunset and goes, what does the sunset mean? Don't rush into trying to figure out what these images mean, which takes you into thinking, not imagining. Allow time to be impinged upon by the meaningfulness of the sunset. Look at the painting without rushing into reading the blurb about the painting. The blurb will help you think about the painting, but spend time with the painting, for example. And in this way, we treat images as images, and that's what fundamentally enhances your imaginative life, as opposed to what often happens is treating images as ideas, trying to very quickly figure out what they're symbols for or what they represent. That's fine, you can do that as well, but to begin with, to have an experience, an imaginative experience, to step into a new possibility of who you are and how you see the world, slow down and take in the evidence of your sense experience and notice how that's woven into how you feel and think, because that's what imagination is.